everyone. Welcome back to Manufacturing Hub on this Wednesday afternoon. If you're watching us live, if you're listening on podcast format, the first day we come out, Thursday morning. Very happy to have everyone back. Very happy to have Chris and Annemarie back on the show for a full Manufacturing Hub. And we'll go ahead and dig into this. So if you guys are longtime listeners, you may remember all the way back in episode 216, Vlad and I had a awesome conversation with Chris and Annemarie at the Siemens booth at Automate, talking about manufacturing resilience, which was a really fantastic topic. Would highly suggest you guys take a listen to that. Not right now, but after. We'll go ahead and make sure to drop all of the links in there. As a side note, Vlad and I will be at the Siemens booth at Automate in 2 weeks, a week and a half, on Tuesday afternoon. The Siemens booth is episode 1214. Automate is just coming faster and faster, and it doesn't matter how many times I talk about it. It feels like it's already here. So Vlad and I will be there live on Tuesday afternoon. You guys should go walk around the entire Siemens ecosystem. It is an impressive feat to behold, and I have not seen the booth yet. I just know for sure that it will be an impressive feat to behold, as it always is. If you guys are new here, welcome. If you've been here before, welcome back. If you're new here, every week, Vlad and I have an awesome conversation talking to other manufacturing practitioners and executives. This week, we're happy to have Chris and Annemarie back. So without further ado, everyone officially welcome to Manufacturing Hub. This is episode 264. My name is Dave. This guy up here is Vlad. Chris, Annemarie, welcome back to Manufacturing Hub. Thank you guys so much for being here.
Thank you, Dave. And just a quick fun fact for you, by the way, because Annemarie and I just talked to A3. But what they told us is last time it was in Chicago, it was roughly 30,000 that attended. Last year was around 40,000, so significant growth. Their expectation this year is around 50,000. So that's a massive leap just in 2 years at the same location. I thought that was pretty interesting and definitely eye-opening, because to me, it just screams how people want to learn, especially in this space, how much this space is changing, the transformation that's happening, and you can see it in the numbers, and the numbers don't lie. I mean, those are facts. So it's really cool to be a part of it.
Very impressive. Good on them for such growth. I'm really excited to see it in person in a couple of weeks. But no, thank you so much, Annemarie, Chris. Really, thank you so much for your time. I think it's going to be a great conversation. Before we dive into all the topics we do want to address today, for those that haven't seen episode 216, could you please give us a reintroduction, explain a little bit what it is that you do, how did you get started in manufacturing, and ultimately, what does your role revolve around today? Annemarie, do you want to?
Can do. I can start. Yes. So I actually started with Siemens 10 years ago. That was also when my professional career started. I started as a systems engineer working in the Bay Area, especially with many of our consumer electronics customers. At the time, the electronics industry was still kind of evolving a little bit. And I was, like I said, working as an application systems engineer, basically introducing automation into a lot of the electronics assembly operations. So that involved a lot of virtual commissioning, really starting with the digital twin, starting with simulation, and then also speccing what types of PLCs, drives, I/O modules, network equipment, switches, etc. would we need, and putting that together. And thinking through this and kind of anchoring myself in where I started and how my role has evolved since then, I was actually remembering starting out as a somewhat junior systems engineer, right? Sometimes getting familiar with our Siemens tools and TIA portal and putting stuff together and getting things set up, I would get somewhat frustrated, and I would be like, hey, this stuff doesn't do what it's supposed to do or what I want it to do. And my boss at the time would tell me, no, it's doing exactly what you're telling it to do, right? It's so basically, I mean, he was German too, right? So obviously very direct. But basically the point being that automation equipment basically behaves exactly the way you configure it and set it up, right? And if it doesn't do exactly the things that you want it to do, it's most likely that you just haven't set it up the right way as a system. And so what my role has evolved to since, I would say, is how do we bring these automation qualities of, let's say, determinism, right, or deterministic behavior and reliability into this new world of operations and introducing AI in automation, because obviously I think when we see ourselves kind of configuring or using AI, even in our consumer world today, then saying, hey, this thing, I'm prompting ChatGPT or whatever it is, and it doesn't quite spit out what I expected it to spit out, that's a very common thing that I think we're experiencing, right? So my role today revolves very much around how do we bring this determinism and this reliability of automation into the AI world as we're attempting to really introduce AI into automation and into operations, not just to create fancy dashboards or fancy suggestions, but in order to actually make an impact in manufacturing, which is ultimately always going to involve actually writing back to controllers. So looking forward to talking about that a little bit more.
Appreciate that. Chris?
I'll try to keep it a little bit shorter. But it was a little more than 10 years ago, 10 times 2 plus a few years. I won't get into that. But I sold assembly and test equipment. So I had metal chips in my shoes. I had safety glasses. This is actually before you had to wear the orange vest. So we would walk around the plants, the facilities. And this was also when a lot of things happened during shutdown. So my Christmas vacations weren't as pleasant as they are today. So these kind of things. So I did that for a little while. Then I realized how exciting this software world was, because I had a few friends in the software world. So then I moved into, at the time was SGRC, now it's Siemens PLM, or Siemens DISW. So did that for quite a few years. And I realized how much more fun the manufacturing space was. And I realized, more importantly, that's a little bit of dig on my friends at SW. So kind of, I'm half joking. But what I realized, though, is what the customers were asking for was both the software and the automation worlds, or the software and the hardware worlds. So I saw the opportunity for Siemens to, specifically in the US, when you look at what's happening in the US, it's a massive transformation across all industries, as you know. Tons of investment that's happening in this space in particular. And customers want to move at the speed of software, but they have to realize the value on the automation side. So I saw the opportunity to really step into this role, disrupt Siemens internally a little bit, and start bringing those two worlds together so we can have the right conversations with our customers. So I came back into this role almost 3 years ago now, or came back into the automation space almost 3 years ago now. So it's been, I got to say, it's been a lot of fun. A lot has changed since the metal chip shoes days, but to Annemarie's point, there's still a lot of challenges and things that we see on a daily basis that we're excited about, that we can help solve.
Appreciate that. It's a very interesting thought, like as a side note, Chris, right? Because there's obviously always debate, specifically in automation, what is sort of lagging to an extent. Is the bottleneck the hardware side? Is it the software side? Because ultimately we're seeing more and more innovation, as Annemarie mentioned already, on the AI front, but we still need to remain grounded that AI, however advanced may be, right, and we have data centers and all this compute power, at the end of the day still controls field valves, sensors, right, that may have been designed on systems and electronics from multiple decades ago, right? So there is this kind of debate even inside of our community, is the hardware side going to catch up? And if so, how? And what is possible and what are the limitations? So definitely appreciate that point and perspective. Now let's just dive into this, right? So again, I think Annemarie mentioned this already. AI is top of mind for, I would say, anyone from engineer at the plant floor level all the way up to executives. Obviously, they're all trying to figure out different angles, right? Anywhere from how do I program my PLCs faster? How do I troubleshoot better? How do I document my systems in a different way, to designing entire facilities? What can we simulate? And I know that both of you are giving a keynote in a couple of weeks. So maybe if I were to ask you in a broader sense, right, since Siemens touches a lot of different AI areas, what are some of the top of mind, maybe tools and solutions that you're discussing with executives when it comes to AI?
Maybe I'll start. First and foremost, it's the ROI. So first and foremost, I think the biggest question mark is, what is the value of AI? So usually what drives the initial conversation is fear. So typically what they're asking us to do is come in and talk about, hey, Siemens, we know you have all the components. We just talked about it, right? The software, hardware. We know you're uniquely positioned. We hear what you're saying in the market. but can we come in and talk about real use cases, real scenarios? What is the value to me? How do I walk up to a machine, talk to it as if it was human, understand why my yield is 2% less today versus the day before, and actually drive through some of the solutions and implement those solutions into this deterministic, rigid layer that Annemarie talked about? And how do I take all that magic that happens into this controlled environment? And I think there's, to your point, Val, you kind of brought it up, there is a pretty big disconnect with how can I, it's great that I simulate all these things in the software world, and it's great that I come up with all these solutions, but there's plenty of CEOs that will tell you the only door that matters is the shop floor door, because that's when they get paid, right? When that product goes out the shop floor door, that's when they get paid. And so if you can't figure out how to take these solutions and apply that to the shop floor, and that product goes out the door better, right, faster, then we have an issue. So that initially is the conversation that revolves around, let's talk value, let's talk return on investment. And it's becoming a little bit easier, I would tell you, because this lack of workforce, where lines are being shut down, and where they're looking at robotics and they're looking at AI as maybe replacements of, hey, I don't have the workforce, so therefore my line doesn't run 10 hours a day or 12 or whatever that is. But that's typically where we go, is that ROI value discussion, because there's tons of articles out there, as you know, McKinsey, you name it. Everyone's producing articles saying people are still trying to understand what the value of AI is. So that's where we go first, is these conversations around use cases, ROI, and it is different from company to company. That's why we have to tailor those conversations, and for sure industry to industry. But that's where those are the conversations that we initially start with.
And I would add, the ROI basically comes with us making it real. So I think the one component I would add is we're trying to be a little bit quicker here, is we are trying to map, and we are working with our customers kind of fast track to implementation, of course, not just for the sake of implementing something, but really as we map out the ROI, and as we basically look at, initially we start with this big picture, right? We start with the digital thread, but then really translating to, like, what does that mean? Yes, the digital thread is often like a big vision of how do we integrate engineering and execution and operations and all the different tools that we have, ultimately to improve yield or throughput or whatever the ultimate business case might be. But then really actually bringing that digital thread to life, which for us is very much involved with this orchestration, where we bring multiple components and multiple bus stops on that digital thread in a real execution system and tie it all together. We see that with us being able to use data, of course, from our various customer engagements, we are more and more able to expedite the path to value for our customers and expedite these engagements to value and to implementing concrete solutions.
I like that. There is a lot to unpack just on that particular answer. I think both kind of the time to value and specifically the execution that you had mentioned, Annemarie, that I'd certainly like to get into a little bit more. But before that, I think, Chris, you had mentioned the ease of being able to have some of these conversations about ROI, and kind of, you said something to the effect of AI and the kind of need of it needing to solve a problem, or it being a solution to a problem, and being able to go ahead and tie that to ROI. Of those conversations that you both are having, are those conversations typically because of lack of workforce? Are they typically because of we need to go expand production? What are the drivers of those conversations that you're seeing?
Yeah, I'll start, Annemarie, and you can chime in. Two things. One is the lack of workforce. We already discussed that. So I was on a panel a few months ago, and two of my colleagues on the panel said the ROI to introduce automation. So at the time, this is very automation specific. For us to introduce automation used to be, we used to have to validate it in an 18-month period. So for us to introduce it, pay back in 18 months. That's grown to like 36 months, number one. So, and because of labor contracts and some other things, right, that's contributors to that. The other piece they said is we used to have a lot of our ROI calculation was around productivity gains and quality. And so they're saying because of lack of workforce, production lines aren't running. So when you're not running, every minute's thousands and thousands of dollars, as you can imagine, right? So the ROI becomes a little bit easier because of that. So that's what I was alluding to when it comes to workforce. The other very interesting topic, I think, and Annemarie and I were both in this meeting with a CPG company just recently, is around OEE. So as you know, most companies are operating around 70% OEE. Well, there's tremendous opportunity there for efficiency gains, right? Tremendous. And this company in particular, I mean, it was really interesting. They knew down to the 0.1% what value they could realize for their company. So we were having discussions about literally 0.1% or 0.2 or 0.5, depending on the technology, of what that expectation would be. And they were saying, oh, I can justify the value of this project just on that. So that, to me, Dave, that was eye-opening when a company, this particular company, knows that. And I think a lot of companies know that, right? So that, I think that's another area where we go because there's so much opportunity for efficiency gains. So that's the other space. So it's two different kind of case studies, if you will, that I was at least engaged with, and Annemarie was with me on those. So that's the areas I was referring to.
Absolutely. I would say that the more mature of the larger organizations certainly know where they're at OEE wise, and they certainly know what that 10th or that 1/4%, what value it brings to them. And those are very different conversations when you're having those conversations versus you're having a conversation with a group who's looking for data collection, right? Or looking for kind of the very basics. I've had several conversations, 2 or 3 dozen conversations with groups who are like, hey, I want this AI thing over the last 2 or 3 years, less so this year, but more in the previous couple of years. And so you go and you have the first conversation and it becomes, okay, where are you at currently? Like, what does your data collection look like? And it's, well, sometimes our data collection is someone walks around and writes things on a clipboard, and maybe they take that piece of paper off the clipboard and it sits on a desk. And once a year, we go through the process of throwing out that paper because we're never going to look at it again. So it is very different when it comes from, it's very different when you look at the broad range of groups who are currently manufacturing and the differences, or maybe more so similarities in their struggles.
I agree. And I think what we've seen, like this whole data collection discussion evolve towards is really, and Chris and I talk to our customers about that all the time. We're kind of moving, we had this, like, how do you get from data to insights discussion for many, many years, right? So how do you collect data, contextualize data, and then get the insights from it? So you get it was, for the longest time, it was like about transparency, right? It was about this like 0.1% adjustment to OEE that moves the needle. And I agree, like, to me, the top 3 ROI drivers that customers are looking for until today is throughput, energy, and yield, and downtime reduction. But what the conversation more and more shifts towards is, okay, now I might have the insight, but then now going from insight to action, and actually making a set point adjustment or modifying the workflow or the process, or like literally like tuning or adjusting that process parameter in order to tweak that identified root cause of the issue. How do I get from the insight that I might have, or that many of the advanced companies have today? How do I get to action, and what does that involve? And I think that's more and more where we see a lot of the conversations revolve around, which then goes to the point, okay, who makes the suggestion, right? Who brings the insight, and how do we validate whether that insight is a probabilistic suggestion from a large language model, or whether that's actually something that we can reliably write back to a piece of control equipment. But this is a very exciting discussion, I think, where a lot of the disciplines converge that we've been piecing together over the years.
Absolutely.
Vlad, can we talk about the energy topic for just a minute? So I think there's some pretty interesting stats that, yes, this is so, in the presentation, actually, we'll refer to it, but I was at a conference manufacturing, NAM, National Association of Manufacturing, incredible audience. Like incredible audience. A lot of small, medium-sized companies, the people that run their organizations, right? I think the conversation was fantastic. One of our partners got up on stage and talked about just simply a couple simple graphs around demand and supply around energy.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a gap that's significant today, and they said by 2040 it doesn't get any better. And a lot of it has to do with our infrastructure and how fragile infrastructure is, but also the demand. So if you look at data centers and how much demand the data centers are driving, it's significant, which is ironic because the ones that don't care about the energy is data centers because they can charge enough that the energy cost doesn't impact them. Now, I was on a panel last week with Borg Warner, and what Borg Warner talked about, I thought was fascinating, was this idea of energy management. It started with a sustainability initiative, but where it went really quickly from an ROI standpoint was the amount of energy they were consuming. They had no idea, right? And so what first and foremost is they started seeing the trends by plant, by assembly line, by day, by summer, by season, by month. And very quickly, they were able to understand what their energy consumption was and make a significant amount of adjustments using a digital twin and change those and make some adjustments and change those peaks, right? To lower some of those peaks and save a significant amount of money. I can't remember the number that he said on stage, but he said the project paid for itself in less than 6 months, something like that. The other interesting use case, and this is where we're with a semiconductor company just last month, is predictability. So again, it's one of we talk about this in our keynote, but this idea, if you can predict how much energy you're going to consume each month, millions of dollars, Dave. This is the game that all the other industries outside of data centers has to play. It's millions and millions of dollars in savings because of this demand and supply. So, and we have the tools for both the building. This is where Siemens is unique, both the building and the machines in the building. And so we're working extremely hard with these companies to help predict the energy, because if you do a great job at predicting and you're spot on with your win 0.1, 0.2%, the savings are off the charts. I mean, it's significant. So very interesting times when it comes to energy and energy consumption because of what's happening with the explosion of data centers, but also interesting from an opportunity perspective. So there's a lot of discussions around that. So sorry, she got me excited. She brought up the energy topic and got me excited about that.
No, I think it's interesting. I know for several years, Siemens over in Europe and in Germany has been spearheading a lot of sustainability, and a lot of that sustainability also goes back to energy. And every time I'd go and have conversations with different people in different verticals, they were very passionate about the sustainability and very passionate about the energy. And I'm like, I am very excited about this, but I just currently don't see this over in North America for a variety of reasons. And so it is very interesting, and I will be very interested to go watch at how a lot of the tooling and other value and testing that has been, piloted in Europe and other places will speed up that mean time to value for data centers and other industrial facilities in North America.
Let me ask maybe a follow-up question on the front end. I apologize for some of the camera issues, but it looks like everything has been fixed. So I'm very curious, as you have these conversations around ROI and deploying AI solutions for different customers, right? Of course, there's going to be nuances. What are some of the initial, maybe I would say, conversations when it comes to what does it take as an investment, as the architecture, right? Because ultimately, at least in my experience, speaking for myself, a lot of the plants still struggle in exposing some of that data, right? There needs to be some revamp of the architecture. So I'm curious to hear, maybe as you talk about ROI, what are some of the then requirements to get there, so to speak?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, because we've been talking about ROI so far, I would say, from an output perspective, right? So how do I increase throughput, yield, reduce scrap, increase quality, reduce energy consumption and cost? But then there is, of course, often also that input, that productivity, or like the integration cost and like the engineering effort and the engineering efficiency. When we discuss, hey, in order to actually realize these targets, obviously a lot of the heterogeneous, like scattered tools and landscapes need to be integrated. Data integration layers need to be introduced, unified namespaces need to be introduced, standards need to be introduced, digital twins need to be introduced or built, right? And often, of course, there is kind of an initial hesitation as to like, what does it take, right, from an integration and engineering effort perspective, because it looks like a daunting task to now pull all of these systems together. Now, I think what we're seeing more and more is like two things. One is really like our partner ecosystem that we are building up and we heavily rely on, of course, and where we see within the ecosystem also, I would say, kind of a convergence of the typical IT players and the typical OT players that now start to meet in the middle and help us piece these systems together. So I think that's what, I don't want to talk for too long, so I think that's one topic we could dive in deeper. But then also from our perspective as a tech company, more and more, like, we don't just want to throw like a platform over the fence and say, hey customer or hey partner, good luck with that. But more and more we are building these like knowledge packs and like configuration packs that simplify engineering and like data mapping, and specific like industry oriented use cases that we're basically pulling out from some of the first deployments and now packaging up so we can, you know, drive that repeatability in these economies of scale as we're rolling out these use cases to more and more manufacturers or to more and more sites, that it's not going to be like a custom bespoke integration effort every single time again and again.
Yeah, I think
appreciate it. Any thoughts on your side? Go ahead.
Yeah, I think the other thing, Vlad, that we're seeing is a lot of companies realize that that's the tax they have to pay. So what we're seeing is, whether it's CPG or pharmaceutical or automotive, is we're seeing big investments in sensors. So what they realize is they have to collect data to get, you know, initially it was these data lakes. So a lot of the hyperscalers are running around selling people on data lakes. Hey, you have to have BI tools and you have to have reports and you have to have all these great things. But the reality is that's all rear view mirror looking, right? And I think what they're realizing is, yes, they kind of invested in this infrastructure, but now they're realizing how important it is for AI. So they're realizing that, okay, now that I at least have the data, and Annemarie referred to it as, now they have to contextualize the data to build all these relationships. Once I have that, now I can leverage any model that I want to put on top of it. So people can run around and talk about models all day long, but if you don't have data and data contextualization, they don't do anything. You won't get the value. So it's almost like they're coming up with the ROI, if that makes sense, Vlad, because they know they need to go buy the sensors. Literally, we were just with a company that bought $2 million worth of sensors just because they knew they had to collect data. Literally, when we asked about the ROI, it was pretty interesting. I won't get into it, but it was pretty interesting. It was let's just say they're showing up tomorrow. I said, okay, that's good.
Let me ask you then maybe a follow-up question on that front, right? So I would say that for me, again, when I discuss AI in a broader sense, one of the objections, of course, specifically for automation, it's the fact that there will be some mistakes, right, coming in from any model of your choosing. And so I'm curious, as I'm certain you get those questions and maybe hesitations as well, how do you navigate and explain and evangelize maybe some of the guardrails, but also, you know, as a hardware and software provider, to an extent, I'm assuming some of it falls on you, some of it falls on the integrator, some of it falls on the customer. Like, how do you maybe have those discussions, and what is usually, I would say, maybe a selling point, or maybe something that the customer truly realizes, well, yes, this is amazing, we haven't thought of this, when it comes to specifically hallucinations and guardrails?
Yes. Chris, should I start with a tech perspective and you can add your people process perspective, or would you like
I think you should start with our tagline, which is, Vlad, in 13 days, you're going to see why AI loves automation and how it provides this predictable, reliable, and safe environment. So with that, I'll let you speak.
Perfect. Yes. And we don't want to take too much of the keynote already away now, but we will definitely. So let's maybe hone in a little bit on this concept of safety and trust, right? Because I think, Vlad, this is what you were alluding to. We can't trust AI suggestions that will, by the nature of the design, always be probabilistically generated. So we need to validate these AI suggestions in order to actually then safely and reliably write back to a control layer. And this is actually where we're trying in like the design of our tech stack and our systems to actually pull from the many decades of automation experience that we have. And we'll actually go into a very specific example. But when you think about industrial safety, one thing that we see there is that we always have 2-channel evaluations, right, in all of our like fail-safe IO modules and so on. And so we basically like pull up this concept of like a 2-channel evaluation where, for example, if we have a large language model or a piece of AI actually make a suggestion to adjust a parameter or like write a set point, we will always validate that suggestion against either like a state machine or like a workflow representation or a physics-based or geometry-based digital twin to validate based on like true physics ground principles as to whether the suggestion actually makes sense and will actually achieve the goal that it's intended to achieve. And only if that validation has been passed, this orchestration layer or this mediator will pass the control parameter through to the actual controller. And this is how we're basically bringing up a principle from the automation world into the world of AI, which then of course means that we have to integrate many of these components, right, and design these workflows and do that upfront work. But that's also the people and process side, I think, that Chris you can talk to. But in the design of our tech stack, that validation and that guardrailing and safeguarding and at the layer between AI and control is one of the core things that we're implementing and building.
Which
it's super interesting, right? And let me, Chris, really quickly just make a comment for the listeners and the viewers of the episode. I know that Annemarie, your team is pretty much on the bleeding edge, right, when it comes to a lot of the Siemens solutions, right? Not just AI, but a lot of the portfolio. I would say, and make a comment, that a lot of my customers are using AI to, let's say, generate some of the code or maybe validate some of the code. I have not yet seen, an application where we can use AI to change control system parameters, right? And as you've mentioned, there are those scenarios as well. So that makes me really excited, but I will say a little bit nervous as well, because I would want to see how it's architected to, again, like make sure everything is proper. But I'm sure you talk to many customers that have gone through that journey. So it will be real interesting to see automate as well. So I appreciate that.
Yes, and looking forward to having you at the booth and at our truck, where we will be showcasing the architecture and the concept actually together with many of the stations that we'll have there, and also looking forward, of course, to many, many customer conversations to continue to validate and then expand that stack.
Gotcha. And Chris, process and people, obviously a very important part. What are your thoughts on that side?
Well, let me talk about technologies for a minute. I know she doesn't think I can talk about technology, but the world I came from, so I was on the software side. So the world I came from was this idea of a digital twin. And let me tell you the evolution of it and how it relates back to exactly what you just said. How am I going to trust it to update the control layer? As she alluded to, it's more than just a fancy visualization tool. So the way when digital twins got traction 15 plus years ago, it was usually in the initial setup. So usually it was initial setup of a plant, a lot of times to justify equipment, a lot of times to look at layouts, like where is this equipment going to go, material flow, how's material going to flow, where do I put dunnage, these kind of things. And then you would almost take this digital twin and put it on a shelf, and then you would your manufacturing world would live on, right? You would make changes or whatever, because to go back and make that big investment in the twin didn't make sense. It was difficult to go do. Now, because of exactly what you just asked for, Vlad, it makes sense for this thing to live and breathe. So we need that people and process side to back, Dave? Dave, are we back?
Did we lose?
Oh,
there we go.
Okay. Did we all freeze?
I feel
I
like
hear you now,
I think
Chris.
Possibly. Chris, go ahead.
I don't know where I left off, but so talk about the digital twin. It is a physics-based model. It's just not a fancy visualization tool where we do plant floor layouts and material flow and where does dunnage go and all that kind of all these. It is a physics-based model. So when you want to go make these changes, or there's these changes that you're suggesting with concepts like virtual commissioning and soft PLCs, we can actually make those changes that were being suggested, validated in the digital twin or virtual world, and then say, and still have a human in the loop, Vlad, that says, okay, yes, this is going to work, and then implement it to the control layer. So that's just this idea of digital twin. If you guys saw CES, you saw PepsiCo on stage with Roland, you saw Jensen from NVIDIA on stage with Roland, and they both had a very similar message saying the digital twin is no longer a nice to have, it's a must have. You have to have it. And things like what I just talked about is to validate those solutions so you can update the control layer or write back to the control layer. And the biggest, I think, hurdle in the past was the people and process side. So the biggest hurdle in the past was they didn't have this digital twin to live throughout the life cycle of the product because they didn't have the right skill sets, or they would run into bandwidth issues. Now they're starting to figure out how to do that, and it's now a part of their process. So going back to that twin, making updates, validating changes, evaluating concepts, validating code, all these different opportunities or use cases, that's how this digital twin is being used. So very different than, like I said, a decade or 12 years ago, where it was more for the setup. So that has transformed tremendously, which is why Siemens has made significant investments to build out the richness of this digital twin.
Yeah, and I think that makes a lot of sense, right? I think that it's important to recognize that AI, or I would say more specifically LLMs, are relatively new, right? And like in our industry, it takes a little bit of time to get used to new technology. So there's going to be obviously companies that adopt much faster, right? Or companies that are a little bit on the lagging side. So there will be this natural, I think, progression that may shrink. But despite there being maybe still steps, right, where you introduce kind of the fundamentals, hey, like let's collect some data and let's just maybe even on an offline basis feed it to an LLM locally where we get a little bit of ROI. And then as we get more and more comfortable, with the human in the loop, we can start removing, that person by changing the workflows to now automatically feed some of that information back. And again, obviously, I think it's very interesting because, like I said, sometimes I need to speak to engineers who are a little bit maybe too eager, in my opinion, but at the same time are trying to push the limits and understand like what is possible, and they need to implement those guardrails for a specific facility to, again, not deviate from the process. So it's going to be very interesting to see, again, how some of the learnings from the larger companies are maybe reapplied to small and medium and other businesses. Let me ask you a follow-up. Speaking of people and process, right? So you've mentioned a little bit earlier, obviously you are focused on delivering the hardware, the software, and I know you have solutions teams as well, right, Annemarie, that you work with customers, but ultimately you also have partners, right? And those partners could be distributors, could be SIs, could obviously be end users, right? But a lot of times SIs and maybe the distributors will carry the technical capability. How do you see them, I would say, adopt some of the new technologies, but also evolve in their approaches as AI is being deployed through your products?
So I recently had lots of interesting discussions exactly with these partners. Vlad, you mentioned them all, from solution partners to the system integrators to the distributors. And I think it's interesting to really kind of see these partners like meet each other at this intersection of AI and control, or IT/OT from like a buzzword perspective, because now this is where this orchestration layer lives, for example. So I think Chris shared about like partners that would typically come maybe more from the PLM space or more from that simulation space, right? And we already discussed how a simulation that would in the past have been created at engineering time to like validate the behaviors of the automation system, or validate throughput, or validate material flow, or validate like process design, now can basically packaged up as a reduced order model or as an executable digital twin, right? And live on the edge to basically then serve as this guardrail or as this validation at runtime, at operations time. So it's interesting that engineering partners, let's say, move from the left to the right and look more and more into operations, or like IT partners look to move more and more down and apply their capabilities like in manufacturing. And at the same time, our typical distributors and system integrators and solution partners that live very much on a control level in order to differentiate, right, and basically increase their share of wallet or their business overall, also want to move upwards. And I think it's really interesting to form these like communities and like practitioner like exchanges to really learn from each other, and like I said, kind of meet each other in the middle, and bring this ecosystem of partners more and more together that allows everybody to grow and learn from each other and like explore a new world, and then collectively like put this orchestration layer together. Yeah, let's leave it at that point, I think.
I think, Vlad, just to add to it, give you some concrete examples. I've been in a couple different distributor meetings, pretty high level meetings with some of our large distributors. Every single meeting I'm in, the same question comes up. And in some cases, they've already hired people. In some cases, they've already launched a division, but they said, Chris, we want to get into software. Do you have suggestions? What do you think? Should we acquire somebody? You know, how do we get into this space? And again, it all goes back to the customer. The customer's demanding it. I kind of started with like my career journey here at Siemens. The customer's demanding it. So the customer is saying, hey, look, and demanding it in the sense of this is what they want. This is how we could be their trusted advisor. If you could talk about both spaces, it makes you unique, right? And so they see that. So every distributor is asking for that. I was just on a panel. My friend from ProLim was on the panel with me. He's a longtime software value-added reseller. That's what we call distributors on the software side. Mm-hmm. All he talked about was Edge. So he has been selling Edge and some of these other platforms. I think he's dipping into SCADA. So historically, automation, right, software components. He talked about Edge for, Annemarie was there like 20 minutes, right? And how important Edge is, and being close to the machine and making sure we have that millisecond response time. And it's not just about the cloud. And this is just recently, he just started a few years ago. So it was really awesome to hear a value-added reseller to come into what Annemarie said, that space as well. So every single one of our partners is asking about it. And our SIs are asking, how do we get into more of that space? Not some, all of them. So, because again, when they go talk to the customer is saying, I need to bring OT closer to IT, right? And vice versa.
And maybe one other concrete example along these lines, sorry, just to sneak that in, I had a similar discussion with one of our great partners from DMC, very much, of course, on the solution partner, system integrator expertise, very much on that control level traditionally, but of course also more and more like moving up the chain. But we've discussed that, okay, if you look at yourself as like a control, like OT layer partner, and like historically, we also talked about data to insights, right? So now all you have to do is expose all the rich data from the control layer up into some dashboard or whatever, and then your work's kind of done. That's kind of boring, right? Now, when you think about, when you translate insights back down into action, now your world becomes like very relevant again, right? And how do you introduce, and you guys have discussed with Caleb before, so I'm not going to get into MTP too much, right? But how do you introduce Edge and MTP, and again, the safeguards and guardrails to actually allow the insight to be translated into action, and for the AI or for anything to write back into the control layer? Now the loop kind of literally closes. And so I think closing that loop is something that, of course, control level integrators and solution partners are very experienced with from a closed loop control perspective. And now we're closing the loop on a higher operations level as well, which I think is super exciting for our partners.
That's called orchestration. And you now don't have to go to our keynote because you guys have heard of it.
No.
I don't think anyone could cover orchestration in only one keynote or only 15 hours of Manufacturing Hub, of which we've certainly spent a bunch of time talking about it. Chris, I thought you made a really interesting comment where hardware and other vendors, distributors, continue to move into software. I've seen groups try to do that for probably the last 12 to 15 years. And it's always very interesting. At some point, either in the early conversations or in the process it takes for a hardware group to sell software, you just almost see people's minds break, because selling hardware is so different than it is to sell software. And you need completely different people, and you need different value add solutions on the software side than it is on the hardware side, and a different sales force or a different series of specialists or applications engineers in order to be able to go ahead and articulate and show the value. And it's almost, for some of them, like building an entire, parallel company and organization that has some amount of overlap, but not nearly as much overlap as one would think just looking at them on paper.
Exactly. You hit the nail on the head.
It is very interesting, and that in and of itself would take a long time to have the conversation.
I would love to have a beer and talk about that with you for about an hour. That's an interesting topic.
We should absolutely do that, Chris. What was I going to say? Annemarie, so as we were talking about AI, well, you're always welcome to join. Well, I guess I'm not going to say no. Okay. I'm not going to say no. Annemarie, you had made a really interesting comment as we were getting ready to this for this, and talking about AI and wanting to go through the process of what does it take to make it real, right? Like I wrote down that phrase, and there are lots of ways we could go about asking it, but I would just like to ask, what does it take to make AI real in manufacturing?
So it's getting started. And it's getting started after, we talked about the ROIs, right? And like expediting basically like that use case selection, and then moving forward really with like an implementation phase. So I think a lot of it, and actually, of course, Chris, you can add to this, right? Because I think a lot of this lies then in the people, and especially like the process phase of actually properly structuring like a project acceptance criteria, an implementation plan, something we know very well, right, from just implementing automation systems. So I think really like carrying forward some of that discipline, site acceptance tests, factory acceptance tests, like making the acceptance criteria clear, and starting with a clearly defined scope, and then step by step like expanding to that. Because I think the challenge is that like a lot of manufacturers, larger manufacturers, come in still with this idea of like, let me introduce AI for the sake of introducing AI, right? So like taking this ROI, taking the identified use case, and starting with a clearly scoped project. We often do these like 90-day challenges, for example, and not for the sake of just doing the 90-day challenge, of course, but like with the bigger picture in mind, but constantly kind of managing this like two-layered or like two-threaded approach, where we have a clear like step-by-step implementation, and we always tie every single 90-day challenge or every single implementation step or phase into like the bigger business goal, and constantly kind of check on a monthly level, like from a milestone perspective, whether we hit these or whether we need to like be agile and like pivot a little bit. I think that's really a lot for me starts with kind of the basic stuff you might think, right, from a project management and implementation plan and reference architecture perspective. Now, Chris, I don't know if you can add anything to that, but if you want to.
That's pretty good. I'm proud of you. So one thing I'll add. One thing you forgot that I'll add on top that's extremely important. I think Vlad or Dave, you mentioned this: user experience. And anytime you're delivering technology, I think one of the things that there's two things: OCM, organizational change management, and then user experience. I think these, and in many cases, gets left behind a little bit or doesn't get thought of till the end, and that's a mistake. And I think just this is no different. Is what is that user experience like? What does it look like? Because at the end of the day, you need adoption. If you don't get adoption, you're not getting value. And so I think that's what we've learned is to have that in first and foremost as part of this whole project plan is, what do we want that user experience to be? Do we want this part of a workflow? Do we want this to be presented to that person at the right time with the right data so they can make the right decisions? Do we want this person to walk up to a machine, talk to as if a human? Do we want this person to be a prompting engineer? Like what is we want that user experience? Because that is critical when it comes to adoption. So that would be the only thing that I add. to the conversation is that's something that we try to bring to the front every single time is don't forget about that piece. It's critical. It's important.
Let me ask a follow-up on that front, both of you, right? So what I often see in conversations is that end users specifically are unsure what some of the applications might be for AI. They are, again, like seeking to understand what's possible. And obviously, again, it can be applied in all sorts of different ways if you have spent enough time with it, right? My question is, as you go into maybe these discovery phases, how do you find what the interesting opportunities might be? Do you look at financials and P&Ls? Do you go talk to operators, managers and C-suite level? Like, how do you maybe filtrate and curate or synthesize some kind of a priority list? Like, this is maybe easy to implement, but also very ROI heavy, and all the way at the bottom, maybe like very difficult to implement and lower ROI. Like, I'm curious how you handle the discovery phase of the process.
I would say a lot of lessons learned here, Vlad, and not just with AI, but a lot of the different technologies is we strive in what the customer's asking for by industry. So I think it's extremely important we understand their industry. And that's important because we need to talk in their language. We need to understand their problems. We don't have to have 20 years of experience in pharma, but we need to understand what their problems are. So we need to invest that time as an organization to really understand their problems. Once we understand that, they want us to be prescriptive. Customers want to be challenged and they want to be led. And so it's very important for us to be ready for that conversation. And so what the best results we've seen is when we go to a pharma company and we say, these are the 4 or 5 top use cases we're seeing in pharma. Let's talk about these 3. And they'll say, well, hang on, what about these other 2? And that's probably the most constructive conversations we have around the technology and the fastest to value is when we start there, we're prescriptive, we talk about their business problems, we talk about very specific use cases that have worked somewhere else, by the way, and sometimes we're customer zero. In many cases, we've done it ourselves. And so we have that knowledge, we have that industry experience, so we can bring that to the table. That's where we've seen the best results, because it is vast. You could talk about 150 use cases if you go in and just open up the books and say, what do you want to do, right? You can't do that. You won't get anywhere. You'll have some great conversations. You'll walk away thinking, oh, that was interesting. But as far as value to them, it will take you months if that's your approach.
One thing that I would add that now has become a lot easier for us, of course, is to do that research on the customer. And we often say that it's actually pretty impressive what we can find, that we look at YouTube videos, like typical like manufacturing videos that many manufacturers have some on YouTube, right, where we can actually go and learn a good amount of stuff on their process and the types of machines that we're using and the types of equipment that we're using. So this is also like the commitment from our side. And of course, it's being, elevated and expedited by the use of various models and AI to like search the internet and then map that with our own internal like repository and database of references and success stories and lessons learned and also things that failed, right? And then basically perform this mapping in order to come with, exactly like Chris said, like this prescriptive roadmap or like with an initial idea into the kind of discovery conversations, because I think we're moving away from, asking the customer, hey, what obviously anyways, we shouldn't ask the customer what keeps you awake at night, or, just like tell us what your challenges are. We're going in with like a pretty good set of hypotheses, I would say, that we then validate with the customer, that again helps us expedite these use case identification and prioritization steps.
Yeah, it's a very interesting dilemma, right? And I ask because, again, I am also trying to formulate a framework on how to approach this, to be honest with you. And like I said, I've had very open-ended questions around AI, and then it becomes a balance, I would say, at least for me, whether as you propose the solutions that you have heard of or have seen, right? Because again, I feel like there's not a lot of case studies yet, so the information is not very concrete, right? So there is some trial and error, but at the same time, you can take it as a more traditional consulting approach where you ask them what do they see as problems and sort of kind of turn it around on them, right? Like it's a very interesting balance. And I've even seen use cases where at least now someone will record all of the conversations with the customer, right? Take all the documents and then use AI, which is also a very interesting, if you think about it, it's like AI recommending what it should be used for, which is again a bit of an interesting situation to be in.
Yeah. I think the biggest flip for me, just real quick, has been to stop trying to find use cases for AI, but to start mapping out your business process and then deriving like which of these gaps or use cases AI can solve. So it's like this, and this has been our own internal experience as well. Of course, we get so excited about the new tech that we're then trying to find use cases to apply it to, but if we flip it around and do it the other way around, it yields better outcomes.
Are there any, let me ask you a follow-up on that side. I know you've mentioned a couple of use cases on the energy side, right? And we talked a little bit on the control side. Any other interesting, I would say, again, like I'm looking for maybe ways to build trust with the customer where it's relatively easy to deploy something, maybe an existing, again, architecture that doesn't take, again, years to implement. And there's a quick win where everyone realizes, well, yes, like this is actually very powerful. Let's now plan something out for, again, 2, 3, 5 years where it's going to be a more major, I would say, transformation.
I would say predictive maintenance. Sorry, Chris, you have a good story.
Well, I was just on their panel last week with Borg Warner, with Mars Snacking. That's exactly what we talked about. We talked about preventative maintenance. So, and historically, the way they outlined the business case, I thought was extremely interesting, is what they said, typically, if you had a machine type, there was a set schedule for that machine. It didn't matter if it was 30 years old or 5, didn't matter. It was a set schedule. And if you touched that set schedule, that was taboo. You don't do that, right? With AI, with this idea of preventive maintenance, is you would schedule it when it needs it. And so it was, again, millions of dollars of savings, because the one that's 5 years old doesn't need maintenance every month like the one that's 30 years old does. So they saw significant savings by leveraging AI, reading the machine data off the machine and saying, no, it doesn't need maintenance this month, not this month, okay, now do maintenance. And then scheduling goes along with that, scheduling, inventory of parts, so everything that goes along with the maintenance, associated to the maintenance. There was orchestration that happened with the maintenance of that machine. So I thought that was, and both of them told a very similar story. Both Borg Warner and Mars Stacking told a very similar story as it comes to that. So that's one that comes to mind, because again, I just had this conversation last week with 2 customers.
Interesting. Appreciate the maintenance angle. I'll have to do some research on that side for sure. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I think all of this has been super interesting. Before we go ask you guys the final questions, I do want to talk a little bit about Automate, right? So we talked Automate will be in a couple of weeks from the live part of this show. Chris, you and Annemarie have the keynote. You guys have the keynote, of which everyone's got at least. Thank you, Tuesday morning, of which everyone's got a little bit of a preview of here today. And I imagine that if they're not live there, they'll be able to go ahead and find the video. Vlad and I will be in the manufacturing hub, or Vlad and I Manufacturing Hub will be in the Siemens booth Tuesday afternoon, which is booth 1214. There was mention of a truck. What else should people know about the Siemens experience at Automate?
What I would tell you is we're looking at the truck. We have physical AI that we're addressing, a lot of the use cases that Annemarie and I brought up. So we have this connected environment when you come to our booth. So what you're going to see is business problems that we're solving, not necessarily product names and solutions. So that's exciting. And then, of course, the truck is more of an immersive approach to our technology, so that's pretty awesome. So we're bringing that will be unique. I don't think you'll see anything like that else in the show. So it gives you first walk into the first arena, and we'll talk about high level what Siemens is doing for not only the industry but for the environment and for our customers. And then we walk into the second environment, and we alluded to it. You can see some real test cases, use cases. You can see our tech stack. you could see both the physical and the virtual world working together. So I think it will be a very unique experience, nothing like we've had before, for sure. That I can say unequivocally. So really looking forward to the experience at the booth. So we can't wait for people to show up.
No, that is fantastic. Vlad and I also can't wait. Very excited to see it continues to impress year over year. And there is a very high bar that has been set here today as to what the booth and the truck and all of the immersive experiences are going to be. So thank you both for that very much. As we wrap up, we want to ask you guys the same questions we get to ask all of our guests. Annemarie, I want to come to you first. And we're going to ask you my favorite question out of all of them. It is the predict the future question, right? So on your side, I'd love to get your feeling of what the future of either manufacturing or maybe AI within manufacturing looks like in the next 2 to 3 years, please.
Yes, I see when we talk about autonomous manufacturing, we basically think of remote people that basically validate and approve the suggestions from AI and from the orchestration layer almost in a gamified way. So they can almost get to play this manufacturing game.
Okay, I like that. I like that. Chris, can we get your prediction of the future for manufacturing or AI within manufacturing in the next 2 to 3 years, please?
I mean, I think it's similar. I think it's realistically moving from, we moved from automation to adaptive manufacturing. We saw that move over the course of a decade. I think you're going to definitely see that move from adaptive to autonomous. I don't know if that's playing a game in a control center somewhere, but definitely we see this autonomous manufacturing world with human guidance. And that will be a very short period of time. So I think where people are nervous about, Dave and Vlad, is replacing jobs. I don't see that at all. What I see is adding on a significant amount of roles new to the manufacturing world. So that's kind of my prediction of the future is you'll see a bunch of new roles created. Just like back in 1970, you didn't have a cybersecurity manager. You didn't have an IT manager. Now you do, right? So you'll start to see new roles here in the near future that I think should be exciting for, especially a lot of the early career folks that are coming out of college.
No, that's fantastic. And Chris, that actually sets up our next question, and we'll come back to you for career advice. So if someone is coming out of college or maybe mid-career saying, I've got a bunch more time and lots of unknowns in the future, what's the best piece of career advice you can give to them, please?
Okay, so hold on to your seats. This isn't that exciting, but it's true. Okay. So I just got an opportunity to talk to our Genesis program, which is the early career folks. So we have 35 of them, both software and automation for the first time. So it's really cool. And my advice was simple. And this is advice I give to all my town halls as well, is be comfortable being uncomfortable. If you're not uncomfortable once a day or once a week, then you're doing something wrong, because then you're not pushing yourself. And I know one of the biggest reasons why I came back to the automation space is because every time I talk to Annemarie, I'm uncomfortable because I'm like, I didn't know that, right? So I think that I love that, right? Because it means you're learning. And if you're not uncomfortable, then ask yourself, I always say, look yourself in the mirror and say, what am I doing wrong? So, because it's something that in this space, how fast technology is moving, there's no reason why you shouldn't be a little bit uncomfortable every single day.
I like it. I think that is fantastic advice. Thank you, Chris. Annemarie, to you, same question. A best piece of career advice, please.
So the advice obviously is to go into engineering, but combine engineering disciplines. So, I mean, we always have conversations like whether electrical or mechanical or computer science is the ultimate or like the better discipline. I think the true power lives at the intersection between these disciplines, if you call that mechatronics or whatever. And I think then, exploring the different disciplines and the different domains and kind of figuring out where the gaps are, because I think we're seeing all of them coming together, right? From controls engineering to like simulation engineering to AI to data modeling. Ultimately, I think if you can master all of them a little bit and be a little bit that human orchestrator, I think you're best positioned from a technical perspective to help drive this like future of orchestration in manufacturing. And I think on the personal side, like find the thing that you're excited about and that you want to stand for, and carry that with you, and don't get distracted by politics.
I love it. I think both of them fantastic pieces of advice. I'm not sure at the end they're quite that dissimilar, especially if you're only an electrical engineer, Annemarie. There's certainly some uncomfortability in there for everyone else. So thank you both for that. Next up, would like to ask for a book or content recommendation. Annemarie, can we come back to you?
Yes. So the book I'm reading right now is called AI and the Octopus Organization. I always forget names of the authors. I would need to look up the authors, but I'm sure people can find it, or we can put it in the comments or whatever. There is also a book on just how octopus organizations work compared to like Tin Man, like rigid organizations, and introducing AI in an organization. There's like lots of analogies actually to how like an octopus works. It actually has like a neural necklace, and I think it has 8 arms and 9 brains, 1 in each arm and 1 central brain. So, and the book very much talks about like how you should give your like organizational entities like that autonomy. So like a certain level of coordination, but then also autonomy to the arms. And I think it's very interesting as we define technical solutions. It's 95% about organizational psychology. So like identifying the similarities between how we define or how we build these orchestration layers and how they basically reflect how your organization should best be structured, and basically building these bridges between solution architectures and organizational design, I think is very cool. And the octopus analogies in the book are super interesting. So highly recommend.
That is very interesting. Thank you. Thank you for that. So we will have all of the book recommendations in the show notes. Chris, coming to you. Will it also be an AI in the octopus organization?
No.
Okay.
Mine's more about people. So mine is Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. So Chris used to be an FBI negotiator. It's the only book I went back and reread chapters right after I read that chapter. It's amazing to me because to me, the human psychology and the way people think, and sometimes the way we react, a lot of times we want to be right, and we rear up and we want to be right because that's important to us, and that's not how life works. And what this book is, it gets into how people, the incentives, it's understanding incentives and people and how they operate. And it's not about you're right. It's about that's right. It's about finding a common ground. Because if you want to be right and you want to win the argument, go for it. But at the end of the day, you will lose over and over again. And you will lose in life, and you will lose in work and whatever. So to me, that book transcends both personal and life. I think life is a negotiation to a certain extent. And you want to get the best out of people, because if you do, I think your life you'll be much happier in life if you get the most out of anybody, both personal and work. And that's what it's about. It's about affecting them and incentivizing them and finding that common ground. So I love that book.
It's a really good book. I will make the comment that, in the back of my head, since I've read the book, right, I've always tried to practice the techniques, but I'm always thinking, how was it in his mind negotiating against terrorist groups, right? Well, where lives are literally on the line, as opposed to some of the negotiations I may have. And to an extent, it's very interesting, right? Because those are skills that in some instances could be life and death, but in other differences, like you said, it influences life in general. And he, I think, uses these examples, anything from choosing a restaurant with your significant other to getting pay raises, together getting better projects. But absolutely a really good read. Like even early in someone's career, right? If the question is, how do I get into better opportunities? How do I get into like better projects? Really appreciate the recommendation, Chris. It's a really good book.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much for that, Chris. Next up, we'd like to ask for an interesting idea or innovation. And as we've come to it, picture yourself as like an entrepreneur in residence. And someone like Vlad, and it will be Vlad. Vlad's going to come up and say, hey, I've got some time on my hands. What interesting area should I go explore? Be it a specific idea or kind of an area. You can suggest Vlad does everything. Chris, it looks like you've got something.
This Annemarie and I are working on, she alluded to it in this internal project, but when we're on stage and we talked about it, we talked about this idea of orchestration. But when we started thinking about it, and I won't get into the project we're doing internally, but we're like, that's exactly what we're trying to do internally is orchestration. And then when we look at our personal lives again, when we look at AI and some of the cool things that, whether it's our vehicle or our phone or Alexa at home, is the orchestration of those things that say, hey, your car's low on gas, you should stop at this station as you read your calendar and you're on the way to the Livonia office, as an example. So I think this idea of orchestration across, not just within the manufacturing world, but across our personal lives, across some of our internal projects, I think that's a very interesting idea, innovation. I'd love to see this thing grow, right? And I'd love to see this thing manifest.
Sounds like you're asking for a consumer grade industrial edge.
That's right.
Yes, I get what you're saying. Appreciate it.
Yeah, you should be able to get that done by 6-7 o'clock tonight, right, Vlad? Annemarie, same question to you, please.
Probably a similar idea. I mean, building on what Chris said, what we're often discussing internally is this slogan of if only Siemens knew what Siemens knows, right? So how do we make the knowledge that we have within Siemens available to everybody within Siemens to then make it available to our customers? Now, I think that whole concept actually can and should transcend Siemens and should, move into the manufacturing industry. I think we talked a lot about large enterprises and maybe not as much about the small and medium-sized businesses. I think for them and for everybody, it's important on how do we share, how do we establish these practitioner communities? And we have many of them in various ways and forms, right? But how do we foster these and maybe leverage AI and concepts like orchestration to really, what if the industry knew what the industry knows, right? And how can we transcend boundaries of knowledge that's captured inside certain organizations and make that available to other manufacturers to move the manufacturing industry as a whole and basically have this knowledge hub established. So I think maybe interesting idea for you guys.
I like it. I love both of those. Vlad's brain is just going to go to complete mush now as he thinks of it. So thank you both for that. Better answers than I could have, or better questions than I could have possibly asked for Vlad. Last question for both of you is, how can our listeners help? Who should reach out? Who are you guys looking to connect with? Basically, your open forums to ask our listeners anything.
I mean, the easiest answer to that is, since it's only 13 days away, just come to booth 1214. We have plenty of the people there waiting to engage. Our motto is always meet the customer where they're at, Dave and Vlad. So it doesn't matter if you're early in the journey or late in your journey, doesn't matter. We want to meet you where you're at and have a healthy discussion about, go back to the business problem. Ideally, if people in the booth are listening, ideally, we always start with that, right? We always start with, what problem are you trying to solve? And then let's work on it together. So that's how we want to engage with our audience, with people at the show. We're excited about it. And again, I kind of started with Siemens has a very vast set of portfolio and solutions. So we love to talk about any industry and just about any business problem we're trying to solve, especially in the manufacturing space.
No, fantastic. Both of you guys, thank you so much for the fantastic conversation. I'm already looking forward to the next conversation that we get to have, both in person and then back on Manufacturing Hub. And for all of our listeners, thank you guys so much. We had a bunch of people in the comments jumping in and say hi, saying it was an amazing live. Really appreciating your comments, AI Annemarie. So you guys are all fantastic. If you've made it this far, please make sure that you're following Chris and Annemarie, as well as Vlad, myself, and Manufacturing Hub for all of the latest updates on Automate, on Siemens, and just in general. If you are going to be at Automate, please make sure to hit up the Siemens booth, which is booth 1214. Vlad and I will be there Tuesday afternoon and probably dispersed throughout, in and out over the course of the rest of the show. Beyond that, Yeah, beyond that, if you guys have made it this far on YouTube or podcast format, you're absolutely fantastic. Thank you guys so much. Please rate us 5 stars and follow along and hit the like button, all of those great things. When you do, we post and you guys get it on Thursday mornings. Until next week, we'll see everyone soon.